Well, boils and ghouls, it's your old pal, John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper. And I want to welcome my good fiends of the Horror Heals podcast. Is horror good for mental wellness? But of course it is. I delight in the delicious deaths of pitiful people on the silver screen. So get ready for a hell of a good time with my new fiends, Corey and Kendall, on the Horror Heals podcast.
Welcome, Horror Heliacs, to another episode. I'm Corey, and today we're thrilled to be joined by Rachel M. Martens, a talented author whose love for horror isn't just about scares, it's a way of processing life and healing. Rachel, welcome to the Horror Heals podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Happy Friday. Sadly, it's not a Friday the 13th.
No kidding.
I think we only get one this year. Usually there's at least two, but yeah, it's not Friday the 13th. So, Rachel, could you share with us how you feel about or how our theme of horror being good for mental wellness affects you?
I love your theme. In fact, so I'm a writer. I mostly write horror. I write plenty of other things too, but horror is what I'm best at and what I love most. And a big part of why I write and why I write horror specifically is that same kind of theme, that I totally believe that horror heals, and it has absolutely been a big part of my life, helping me deal with certain things and work through certain things, helping me feel stronger and more powerful, helping me feel like I'm conquering things. And I think a lot of people feel that way.
How far back would you say you started to recognize that horror is good for me, writing about horror is good for me?
If we go way back, when I was a little kid, my favorite shows to watch were Scooby-Doo and Courage the Cowardly Dog. I think I was 8. Okay. My teacher had us do this project for English class where we were supposed to write our own books, little picture books or whatever, and she actually had them printed like in little hardcover books, and it was the coolest thing. My story had a skeleton in the woods and a house fire and all kinds of crazy things. Kudos to my parents and my teacher, Sister Janice, for not freaking out. It's kind of always been a part of my writing, a big part. I have been asked before, can't you write anything happy? And the truth is that I can. It's just not where my passion is.
Yeah. Well, what a great thing for your teacher to do. I feel like if more children had that tangible hardback book, it would just encourage them to write. You know what I mean? That's just, you feel like an accomplished author when you're 8. That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the coolest thing. I still have that somewhere around here. And yeah, it was a huge deal.
That's awesome. Yeah. I do remember in grade school, one of our teachers she laminated the books, so that we could keep them. And then same, I think was 7th grade, we were supposed to write like a autobiography for English class. And it was like a year-long thing. And for some reason, I've got smack dab in the middle of it, a drawing of Freddy Krueger and Jason playing volleyball. Were there other, beyond Scooby-Doo and Courage the Cowardly Dog, like what kind of horror stuff were you exposed to as you started to grow?
Well, I didn't really have, my family and friends were not into horror. So everything I was finding on my own. I was a huge fan of the Terminator movies and Jurassic Park and that kind of sci-fi horror as a kid. That was in our house. My dad was a huge fan of those kinds of movies. That definitely left an impression. I saw the Underworld movies when I was pretty young. I don't think my mother fully understood what I was renting from Blockbuster. I started reading, I was maybe 12 when Twilight was big. So I started getting into vampires. They weren't cool enough, scary enough for me. So I started looking for scarier books and getting into Stephen King. I read a lot of Stephen King and Edgar Allen Poe, and yeah, just expanding from there. In high school, I read a lot of classic gothic horror. That's kind of a big thing that's close to my heart, is that, you know, Dracula and Wuthering Heights, Turn of the Screw, Frankenstein, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I definitely remember we met briefly last year at a horror convention.
Yeah.
And I do remember your booth having that very gothic feel. You know, it definitely drew me in for sure. That's why I wanted to come over and introduce myself and share our podcast. What is it about that gothic stuff that draws you in?
I like how atmospheric it is. I think it's mainly the combination of the powerful emotions with the horror that you feel deep down at a lot of different levels. I love slasher movies too and all that kind of stuff. I love the cool kills and everything, but the ominous psychological kind of horror is really where it's at for me. That's what I feel and connect with deep down.
Was there an aha moment for you when you realized, oh, this is why I like horror. This is why I like writing about horror?
I'd have to say there isn't a specific moment that sticks out for me, but every time I would write something, I always ended up reaching for these kind of haunting moments or these killer endings. I love a good, brutal ending that you remember. Like as a reader, I love the ending of Pet Sematary, Darling, You've Come Home, and the ending of Tale of Two Cities. Those endings just stick with you and haunt you forever. And I try to do that with my stuff. I started to realize that it was when I was creating those moments that I really felt good and confident, entirely myself. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what I'm good at and what I'm passionate about. This is what I'm meant to do. I can write happy things, but I don't get that feeling from writing a romance or anything like that. I'll bring romance elements into my other stuff and a whole lot of other kinds of elements into my stuff. I use the umbrella thriller author because it's a really wide umbrella. But what really makes me feel good is those killer endings and that real horror element.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, immediately my mind went to the movie Found. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's an indie movie
I have
about
not.
a kid discovering that his brother is a serial killer, and that ending will stick with you.
Okay.
I only had to watch it because I think it would give him nightmares. And I was foolish enough to watch it after spending all day at a horror con and coming back that night.
Oh,
And I
gosh.
watched it on YouTube by myself in the hotel room. I'm like, well, I'm just not sleeping tonight.
Yeah.
And it is also based on a book, so if you get a chance, check it out.
I'll have to look for it for sure. Have you seen the movie Ghost Ship?
Is it a 70s or 80s movie?
It's early 2000s.
Oh,
Is that the one that starts with the accident where everybody gets decapitated? Or
Yeah, the
something else?
wire across the dam.
Yes. Okay, then yes, I have seen that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite horror movies. Another one that I probably, my parents had no idea what I was watching. But yeah, that one has a killer opening and a killer ending too, and I
Yeah.
love that about it.
And that we should watch that this weekend.
yeah, we should. I'm not the patient viewer. Corey knows that.
It moves pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to get him to watch The Rule of Jenny Penn. Am I saying it right? It's a new movie on Shudder with Jeffrey Rush and John Lithgow, and it's definitely a slow burn, but it's wow. If you want to get into a psychological thriller, it's really good.
Cool.
So going back to the horror convention, you mentioned, when you were a kid, like your parents weren't into horror, your friends weren't into horror. Have you started to become like part of the horror community via the cons and other authors and things like that?
I just started doing horror conventions last spring, actually. I had never even attended one before. It was kind of terrifying to jump in, to just cannonball into that, having never attended one and going to one to sell books, but it went really well. I love the community. I'm totally addicted to it, and I'm doing a ton of those now. I actually met my now best friend at a horror convention last fall. She was working the booth across the aisle from me at Silver Scream Con, and we talk every day and FaceTime and all of that. It's a cool community, and I love that I finally get to be a part of something like that, because I didn't have that growing up, and it was kind of lonely being, the only person I knew who was really into that really dark stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, I love that you made a best friend from the horror convention. That's very, very cool. What was it about? Like, what was the magnet like that kind of drew you two together? And
actually, she bought my books. She had been eyeing up my books towards the end of the weekend. She came to talk to me and read the back of my first book, Poe Nevermore, and it resonated with her, and she bought them and then reached out to me on Instagram, and we started talking on Instagram and became friends that way. And now we're planning to go to horror cons together and all that kind of stuff. So it's cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. What kind of stuff are you working on now?
I'm working on a lot of things right now. The main thing that people are actually expecting that I'm working on is the next book in my Poe series. There are 4 books in that series so far, and I'm currently working on the 5th one, which is going to be coming out this fall.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm also working on a sequel to another book that's already out called Metalhead. I always kind of meant to come back to that one. When people ask me what my favorite book is, that's the one I point to. It's less horror than my Poe books are, but it's very close to my heart. I always meant to come back to it, that I never felt that it was really complete, that there was more to the story. So I'm going to be putting out a sequel to that one. I also have one totally new project that I'm working on right now that will be another large series. That's exciting to be doing.
That's very prolific.
As a reader of the series, I just think I'm not saying I won't read something that isn't part of it, but I get hooked, and I love the thought that there's another one coming.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
Cool.
I definitely really got into Poe in middle school and devoured a lot of that stuff, and I think Kendall the same way. And now that we're living in New England, it's kind of fascinating to learn about his history here. Can you talk a little bit, kind of give us an overview of what your Poe series is all about?
Sure. I call it a gothic thriller series. The first book is called Poe Nevermore. The main character is a descendant of Edgar Allen Poe, and there's a family curse that takes the form of his stories. So she has to recognize these stories unfolding in time to prevent them. It's also got some pretty major psychological horror elements. There's a lot going on in them. This main character deals with depression and PTSD. She's had some really terrible relationships in the past that she's recovering from and trying to move past, but they're continuing to haunt her. Each book kind of brings to life at least one Edgar Allen Poe story, but there's also a whole lot of other stuff going on too.
And Rachel, only talk about what you're comfortable talking about, and if you don't want to go into any details, totally fine, because that's not what we're about. But are there some parallels between you and the main character?
Absolutely. The old adage is to write what you know. And I don't put real people into my stories, myself included, because it makes me uncomfortable. But there are definitely pieces of me in all of my characters, especially my main characters. My main character in the Poe books, who actually goes by the name Poe, does absolutely have a lot of pieces of me in her. I have struggled on and off with depression since I was about 8 years old. I've also been to a lot of funerals in my life, and that certainly left an impression on me. I deal with grief and death in a way that's different than most people because it's been such a big part of my life. And you can kind of see those things in the Poe books. You can even tell reading them that I was very depressed when I wrote the first few books in the series. And you can totally read that in the character's voice. The later books, it's less noticeable, and she's fighting back and dealing with things differently and becoming stronger, trying to become someone more human, trying to latch on to the good things in her life and hang on to them. And that kind of reflects how I've tried to deal with depression too. That's absolutely in there. Even the PTSD stuff that's in there, I haven't dealt with anything quite like what she goes through and has been through, not at all. But one of the things that I love about horror and why I write these kinds of books and why I read these kinds of books and why I think a lot of people read these kinds of books is it's a chance to see a character who you identify strongly with go up against something that you identify with on some level, but that is far worse than what you've been through. And to see this character fight against that and maybe conquer it, there's something really empowering in that. And there's a lot of things that I've struggled with in my life that I funneled into my writing as, I pulled pieces of my own experience into those stories and amped it up and made it something even more formidable than what I was dealing with. And then watched these characters become stronger fighting it and sometimes win. And that's absolutely really empowering. I mentioned earlier my book, Metalhead, that I said was really close to my heart. It's a little less horror, but it's still definitely got some of those elements. But the main character has a lot of anxiety issues and self-esteem issues, and mostly due to having been in an emotionally abusive relationship. And I, years ago, was also in an emotionally abusive relationship, and I wasn't dealing well with that, hadn't gotten good closure from that. So years later, I funneled a lot of that into that book, and it was a great way to deal with all of that and heal from that. I absolutely still have those scars and still remember that and have bad days, but it's a lot more manageable and it's almost entirely in my past because I was able to use horror and writing to process that. And I think that's what horror is for a lot of people, whether they're reading it or writing it or making movies, watching movies. It's a way to process those things in a controllable environment.
Mm-hmm.
I think you definitely hit it on the head there. I know that there are a lot of people who can relate to the themes that you're writing about. Something that was surprising to both Kendall and me was that a creative project like a podcast could also be therapeutic. And obviously, the writing for you has been therapeutic. But Kendall, can you touch on that a little bit?
I mean, Corey goes to the horror conventions much more often than I have. And he will always come home with such wonderful stories about meeting people like you and just getting to connect with people. So he knows that I won't say I have a fear of crowds, but I don't love them. And so he has eased me into some smaller venues where I felt really comfortable, felt really at ease with speaking to people, even with several people around. I have no fear of public speaking. It's all about being claustrophobic and having lots of people around me. So I have found such solace in doing this podcast and getting to meet people, hearing their stories, feeling like it's okay that Corey and I have our sense of humor together is very macabre and fun. It's okay, and I know it's okay, but I've several times on, particularly on a Friday, I can have had a stressful week at work, and Corey and I laugh because I'll come home and say, "All right, that's done. Can we watch somebody get killed tonight?" It's just, and other people who don't relate to horror probably find that so bizarre. And it's not because I really think somebody got killed. It's just that it's the adrenaline, it's the release, it's the, to your point, and what I love about your characters is I love to see someone win. You know, I love to see someone not be defeated at the end and conquer their, whether it's fears or demons or whatever, you know, sometimes humans. But that to me is really important, and it always stays with me. Did I even answer your question, Corey?
You did. Yes. Thank you. And just to piggyback off that, there's certainly a lot of social situations, at least in the past, that I would be very awkward around, especially large gatherings and stuff like that. I wasn't going to be the guy at a cocktail party to walk up and join the group of 6 people in a circle already having a conversation, but I don't feel that way at a horror convention. I use my tactics. I wear pretty flashy suits and stuff because it's good conversation starters. And I do that also with the other side of our podcast world, which is a podcast called Family Twist, all about family secrets, usually DNA related. But what's been remarkable for us, and I think it's just really strengthened our relationship and it's made us feel accepted in different communities. But when I was at a convention for people dealing with DNA surprises, to have people walk up and tap me on the shoulder and say, "I just recognized your voice from the podcast, and I just want to tell you how helpful it is." It's like that feeling is just amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm horribly awkward in most social situations, actually, but I do really well at horror conventions because it's a big room full of a ton of people, but you know that all of those people have things in common with you and they understand something about you, even though they've never met you. You have really important
Yeah.
things in common with them that you don't have in common with if you go to a wedding for somebody and it's a big room full of a ton of people and you have nothing in common with anybody.
Right. I think you've just explained it in a way that we've never had anybody say it on the podcast. So we're definitely going to use that as a soundbite.
Happy to help.
Thank you.
But yeah, I'm horribly anxious in most social situations. I usually do okay if it's 4 people or less in the room. But if it's 10 to 20, a family holiday gathering or something like that, that's just incredibly stressful to me for some reason. And, you know, all of the panic and anxiety and worrying what people think of me and what I'm going to say and what they're going to say and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I don't get that at horror conventions. I'll spend a 8-10 hour day talking to people at my booth and go grab some food and then go down to the hotel bar afterward and be chatting somebody up at the bar. And I never do that kind of thing. I'm awful at talking to strangers normally, but at a horror con, I can do it.
I agree.
I love, yeah.
This,
Yeah, that stuff.
I just said there's like comfortability that, it's hard to explain, I think. Because conversely, I'm tapped on the shoulder to speak in front of the entire, I don't have that many employees on site, but, we have about 120, and I need to speak to them often. And that doesn't bother me whatsoever. It also doesn't, it's about boring topics, right? I can tell you everything you want to know about our boring dental plan. Things, you know what I mean? That's just, which is important stuff. But, it doesn't touch my heart the way that your topics do, and that's what matters, I think. So, yeah, I appreciate the fact that you've been really forthcoming saying that there are pieces of yourself in your characters. I think that matters a lot to readers, and it helps them even more closely identify with your characters and your plots.
Yeah.
Are you going to be back at Silver Scream this year?
I would really love to be. Yeah, I'm planning on it. They're still going through a lot of the official kind of stuff yet. So paperwork's not done on everything yet, but I hope it all works out because I already booked an Airbnb for the weekend.
All right, awesome. Yeah, it's a great con, and it's drivable for us, which is nice. So, yeah, if Kendall can only handle it for a period of time, then, he can take off and go back home, pick me up later.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite conventions last year. We actually had to fly for it. I'm in Wisconsin, so that was a big, crazy thing to fly out to the East Coast for that one, but it was an amazing convention, and I was really proud to be a part of it. It was very cool.
Yeah, well, it was definitely a pleasure meeting you there for sure. So, Rachel, the last question that we always ask our guests on Horror Heals is, who is your favorite final person, the survivor, in a horror movie?
So I mentioned earlier that I was a huge Terminator fan as a kid, and I still am. And I would say my favorite final person is Sarah Connor. That's the first Terminator movie. She's just a waitress, just a regular girl, no special skills. She's terrified, and she's launched into this insane situation. And then T2, she's this absolute badass and a survivor and a warrior and just practically indestructible. And that always stuck with me, that I just love her as a character and an idol, that she'd be my favorite final person.
I think that counts.
Oh, totally. And I want to say one of our guests mentioned that and said that they also liked the fact that I forget the name of the last movie, the last sequel, but she almost kind of becomes the villain instead of the hero. And it's definitely interesting watching that evolution. I didn't really love how they killed off the John Connor character in that, but aside from that, I actually really enjoyed that movie.
Dark Fate, is that the one?
Yeah, that or Genesis, but I think Dark Fate might be the one. But yeah, I thought that was good.
Yeah,
I obviously can't keep doing them forever because Arnold's getting old.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, Sarah Connor, that's an awesome choice. Very cool. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on here. Thank you for being so open about your story. Thank you for sharing the origins of your Poe series. This has been a delight.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time talking with you guys, and I look forward to seeing you again at Silver Scream.
Absolutely.
Rachel, this conversation has been incredible. From your childhood love of horror to the therapeutic power you found in writing these dark, compelling stories, it's clear horror isn't just something you do, it's something you live. And it's inspiring to hear how your work continues to help you process the personal struggles and emotions that many of us can relate to. Thank you again for sharing your journey with us and for reminding us all that sometimes the things that seem dark and scary are the very things that help us find strength and healing. And of course, to our listeners, as we always say, is horror good for mental wellness? Of course it is. The Horror Heals podcast is produced and presented by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, LLC.